Good morning, everybody. I think we're going to kick off. It's 9 o'clock. Welcome, everyone, to this very exciting conversation that we're going to have today. Thanks for joining us. And I think we're going to talk a lot about wine, climate, decisions, and how we turn data into action. My name is Gerard Martin. I'm the head for research development and innovation at South Africa Wine. But before we start, just a little bit of housekeeping. You will note that only the facilitator and the panelists, their sound is on and their cameras are on, it will be on throughout the fireside chat. But don't worry, if you have a burning question or if you have a comment, you can use the chat to post your comments and questions. And we will make time before we close to discuss your questions, as well as your comments as such. Our conversation will be about 90 minutes. So you can sit back, drink some coffee, no wine, have a glass of water, and we will share this very exciting conversation with you. The session will be recorded, and if you want the recording, you can request it from South Africa Wine. We will make it available to you. So as South Africa Wine, we have invested significantly in climate adaptation research over the last couple of years. And we actually started way back with Tara, who's in this call today, with funding a PhD as well as a postdoc study. We did that funding with some support from the Department of Science, Technology and Innovation. And we further invested in TerraClim, the business. And I believe we are actually now reaping all the benefits of those investments because we have more climate data than ever before. And the question that I have actually is, are we making better decisions because of it? I think I'm proud to say that we've moved from a situation where climate data and information, where it was scarce, to one where we now have lots of data. There's weather station data, satellite data, forecasts, historical records, models, so many things, farm level sensors, and the list can go on. In my opinion, data is no longer a scarce resource, but it's actually about turning data into intelligence, and it's turning data into action. And that is precisely what we are going to discuss with our esteemed panelists today. If you think about climate data has implications, not just for producers, for viticulturalists, for researchers, for advisors, for financial institutions, for governments, industry organizations, technology providers. There's so many people that use climate data nowadays. But everyone needs a slightly different answer from that underlying data. If you think about it, for example, a farmer can ask, should I irrigate? A viticulturist can ask, how is it affecting vine development? A researcher might ask, is this an emerging or long-term trend? And an industry body can ask, where should we invest our adaptation resources? And then you can have a policymaker. We can maybe ask, where are the industry most vulnerable? Same data, but different sort of decisions. And I think this is exactly what we're trying to discuss today. If we look at the current or the latest Climate Compass reports, we can see that the June 2026 data shows that the Western Cape experienced significant regional differences, not just in rainfall, in temperature, wind and winter chill. And we can see at provincial level that we can paint the overall picture, but the real value comes from asking, what does this mean for my region? What does it mean for my farm? What does it mean for my block? And ultimately, what decisions do I make? And that is really why today's discussion is all about moving from climate information to climate action. And with this in mind, I want to hand over to Jono, our facilitator for this session, who will lead the discussion and engage with our esteemed panelists so that we can all hear how they have turned climate data into intelligence, into action, to the benefit of the unique environments. Jono, with that, I'm going to hand over to you.
Thank you, Gerard. I thought it worth saying that your comment about burning questions with some very dark humor in the light of global warming. So I appreciated that start. Not all the questions have to be burning to those in the panel. And I wanted to say that we're hoping that this is going to be the first of many fireside chats where we can gather as an industry and plan how to get ahead of weather that seems to be swinging far harder and more often than it used to. And I think as the South African wine industry, well, I personally love talking about how agile our farmers and our producers and our vinerals are. And I often compare notes with journalists from overseas. And I'm immensely proud of how us as growers and as producers have learned how to box clever against some really wild climate conditions. And the truth is, it has always been hard to farm here. And that's exactly how and why we've become so resilient. But as we were preparing as a team for this event, I had this really uncomfortable thought that what if it is the very fact that we are so resilient? What if it's that resilience that is actually the sort of warm water slowly moving towards boiling, and we are the frog? You know, we've become so good at surviving. What if it's exactly that skill at surviving that has stopped us noticing the increasing clear and present danger? Now, to be clear, the panel that we've gathered today really believes that the solutions are growing much faster than the problems, but only if we engage with those solutions. So what I want to urge us at the start of this is don't make the mistake that surviving is the same as winning. We're not here to try and survive the next 30 years. What we want to do is learn how to thrive in that time. And with that in mind, we took a close look at who was going to be in the room today, at all of you. And the reason we did that is because the panel is not the important part today. You guys are. We want to make sure that you are spoken to directly. And having looked at the list of people in the room with us today, I realized that more than half of you will probably never prune a vine. You run brands, you sign budgets, you buy grapes, you move stock. But that's fine, because this conversation is aimed as much to you as it is to the person who is indeed married to their secateurs and living in their bakkie. So we want to make sure that we really address you in the room. Now, the panel itself is needs no introduction, I'm pretty sure, but my notes say that I have to give an introduction. So first up, we have Dr. Tara Southey, who is the founder of TerraClim. She is the daughter of a Karoo farmer. She's married to a Karoo farmer. So we're pretty sure that the Karoo is not done with her yet. And then we have Marco Roux, who's an independent viticulturalist. And honestly, he has worked in more climates and settings than most of us will work in. He does that in one vintage, more than most of us will do it in an entire career. And then we have Isabel Habits, who we know gets up very, very early because she oversees literally hundreds of vineyard blocks around the country. And similarly, Heini Nell, who's the group viticulturist for DGB, who works at a scale where if you make some mistakes on the job, it's not a bad vintage, it turns into a bad decade. And finally, we have Ken Forrester, or I hope we will have him soon, who's a restaurateur. He's a farm owner, a brand builder, turned all-round provocateur. And I didn't book a fire extinguisher for this fire chat, so we'll just see how that goes. And over the next 90 minutes, I want us to really just try and do three things. The first of all is discuss the season we're in now, the one that has just come and the one that is loading. So Tara's going to take us through that, and we're going to talk about El Nino, which everyone is calling the Godzilla of weather systems. And Tara's going to tell us exactly how worried we should be, what the data says, and how terrifying it is. But actually, little spoiler, the data really is more interesting than it is panic-worthy. But again, it's only if you engage with the solutions, because the data that we're going to be discussing really will relate to business calls that you're going to need to make in the next 18 months to 3 years. Money calls, farming strategy, logistical calls. So this really is crucial that you understand that the information we're giving today needs to be connected to actual, real, practical changes. And the third thing we want to do is talk about the long game. We want to know, what are you going to be planting next? Where are you going to plant it? And how can we make sure that whatever we plant now is still turning a profit in 30 years' time? That's really the goal, is to still be thriving, not just surviving. And then at the end, we're going to be preserving time for questions, at least 15 minutes for Q&A, but don't wait until the end to submit the questions, because submit them from minute one, because if we see a bunch of people circling around a similar theme, then I'll pull that forward and we can talk about it. And be specific in your questions about the obstacles that you're facing. If you feel like, I can't engage with these tools and things that are available because I don't have the time, then let's talk about how to save you time. We're going to be talking a lot about how to save you money, but perhaps it's know-how or skills that you don't have, in which case, let us know that. And if you tie your question to your own situation, then the answer will be more useful to your own situation. And I would urge you, if possible, try to resist the temptation to submit questions that really are more statements, because it's hard enough wrangling the 5 cats on the panel without having to have procured extra panelists from the floor. So again, if you tie the question to your own situation, the answers will really be relevant to your own situation. Perhaps the last thing is, we're doing Fight Club rules today. Because it is our first fireside chat, it's the first night, so everyone has to fight. And by fight, I mean, we don't want to have a little glossy chat where everyone agrees with one another. No one's had a memorable braai or dinner party where we all just smiled and nodded and said, yes, I agree, I agree. So we really want to have rigorous debate, so your questions will help there. And at the end of it all, we're going to ideally come out with practical things that can make our businesses stronger in the short term and in the long term. So that's enough for me for now. I want to hand over to Tara, who is going to take us through the data and set the scene for us. So Tara, can you tell us where exactly are we sitting right now?
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Jono. Appreciate the introduction, and Gerard. And thank you everybody for being on the call. I'm very excited about this fireside conversation around the climate intelligence platform we've spent the last 15 years building as a South African wine industry. And it wouldn't be possible without the panelists on the call to using some of this technology and being forerunners in climate intelligence decision making. So I'm going to kick off with one of the solutions that we have, which is driven from a lot of climate data, and that's a climate compass. And I'm going to use some of TerraClim's climate intelligence data to see how can we answer some of the questions of, before we look forward into the season that we're expecting, how can we look at where we are now and what data and how do we quantify the season now? And this is really important because a grapevine is an environmental probe, and the grapevine collects information over a period of time, and there's a compound effect, and we don't always understand the compound effect. But when we start splicing the data into events that we know linked to the grapevine's expression, we can start looking at what is that pull-through effect into the next season. So I'm going to take us through that. And I think important to emphasize here is not data is one thing, but the timing of when that data is applied can have a very different meaning. So let's look at the data, and I'm going to transition from April to August, looking back. So what was lost post-harvest and winter conditions? So if we look at that, we can clearly see we went into last winter with a much warmer April. So post-harvest conditions were warmer. The way this data separates is you see the mean temperature, maximum temperature in the table, hours above 35, and then growing degree days. So all of that quantifies the heat signal for the season or for that month. Then you get rainfall. Anything that's you see in a red block means we've had less rainfall, and a blue block means we had more rainfall. And then we've got chill units, which is obviously really important, wind, and then hours above 80% humidity. So if we look at our winter conditions across the board, we had a very normal winter. Most of our chill units were accumulated in the month of June. And again, we had quite a warm April as we transitioned into the season. Then we move over to how the season started with September. We had very slightly warmer conditions throughout September. So the season started slightly quicker. Then it tapered off in October with normal October conditions. We had also really nice amount of solar radiation, which could have helped with good bunch initiation. Then the first event we had to weather in the last season was November, December. And it's important to stop here and just pause. We had a significant amount of wind, more than normal. We had extreme mean temperatures driven by extreme maximum temperatures. Our hours above 35 was 200% to 300% more in the month of November and December. So that is the heat index of possible heat waves, could be described as heat waves, but that is also a temperature condition that puts the grapevine under an immense amount of stress that impacts plant physiology. So photosynthesis would shut down, carbohydrate assimilation would be a little bit less. So the season would have just stalled there a little bit. And then obviously wind, and then our relative humidity above 80 dropped, was significantly lower. So it was drier, it was windier, and everybody was talking about the conditions. And this also quantified November. If we look at the temperature timestamp for temperature on a baseline of 0, which is the long-term mean, we can see November, it was 3 degrees warmer, and this is for the Stellenbosch area. December, we also had warmer conditions, and then again spiked in March, and then again spiked in July. So that's where we've seen above normal temperatures over the last, if we look back. Look at the wind. We had significantly higher wind in this November and December compared to what we normally experience. And these conditions exacerbated with less rain and, again, much like the wind and the temperature. So it really was a scorcher of an event. And if we look at that against just a temperature graph for Stellenbosch, again, emphasizing the same picture that we saw in November of the season, which is the yellow line, this last season we had, and this green line is the long-term mean. We can see that September, we started off with warmer temperatures, then it normalized, then November, December, significantly higher. Then we had a saddle effect, normalized with normal temperatures, and again, picked up again in March. So seeing on either side of that saddle, the question is, physiologically, what did that do for the grapevine in its response and how the buds are set for the next season? So keeping that in mind, we went into January and March, where we had an extreme heat event. We had a heat wave between the 1st and the 15th of March. So all the late ripening cultivars experienced a lot of heat. So January was fairly normal, slightly warmer. February was normal. February is the first rains that we really received. We received some rains in March, but then we had 500 times more hours above 35 in that timestamp. So that had a significant effect on just ripening and grapevine physiology. But this is important to note, and this is what we've been doing as TerraClim, is trying to spatialize the data in such a way that we can start seeing across wards, regions, and districts what is the impact of climate, and not just looking at the blanket statement of what happened in Stellenbosch, and that tells a story for the whole of the Western Cape. So what you see here is a map. It's called a difference map. So anything that's more red, between 0 and more red, you've got 60 hours, more hours above 35 in certain areas. So you can see the Olifants River had a lot of hours above 35, Paarl, Stellenbosch, some areas of the Swartland. So starting to tell a different story as to what was your local impact. And that's where this data becomes extremely valuable. And if we look at it on a district level, there was a lot more hours above 35. But then if we compare within a district, which is Stellenbosch, we look at wards. So in each ward, you can see the ward's own long-term average, which is this lighter green, and then the darker green is what we experience in hours above 35. And you can see in most of the wards, it was more than double. And then in Popegaaieberg, it was almost triple. But then again, to quantify the importance of region. So Popegaaieberg had 88.9 hours above 35. 10 kilometers away from that, Polkadry had 47.8 hours. So I'm just showing this to emphasize the power of climate intelligence to actually start using localized climate and not just sticking to what is the regional seasonal overview story that we're telling. Then we transition into April, May, which is the closest to where we are at now. We received a significant amount of rain in April and in May, and that resulted in a lot of infrastructural damage, the floods that we've seen, painful loss that we've seen in the South African wine industry, just the loss of topsoil, the loss of farms. It's been significant. And as Jono says, we are just buffering a significant amount of storms. So if we also look at chill accumulation as well as hours above 35 in April, which is a month that shows a lot of seasonal variability, we can see there was a lot of hours above 35, but also a large amount of chill accumulation already started in the month of April, which is really interesting. And we started to receive our rainfall. And if we look at the rainfall displayed, February 2026 is the blue, the dark blue. And again, this is for Stellenbosch, whereas the long term is the lighter blue. And you can see the transition of we received more than average rainfall in February, March, and then a lot in April, a lot in May. June was normal, and July significantly lower. So if we had to average this, the story would say we received a good amount of rainfall. But the question is, how well was this rain received to set us up for the next season? Our dam levels are looking good, but the question is, does it fit where we're going? So what I'd also like to just note here, we've just released a Rain Scout, and the Rain Scout is for us to start collecting citizen science, and we're going to circulate it after this webinar, and we'd love everybody to sign up to it. It's a freely available app, and the idea is to collect actual rain data from physical rain gauges where every farmer does it, but to start collecting that data so we can start improving our rainfall mapping and modeling. Because at the moment, as a result of all these oscillation systems pulling in different directions, La Nina transitioning to El Nino, the rainfall Error 5 remote sensing layers they're grossly overestimating rainfall. We're getting constant feedback on our rainfall layers that they're overestimations. And that's as a result of the metrics of it's very difficult to use weather station data. So we'd like people to start collecting data. But that's just a side note that I'd like you to look out for. But looking at the image on the left-hand side, we received above average rainfall, if we want to say, between May and July. But if we look at it in the image on the right-hand side, the month that we meant to receive the most rainfall, we received way below average rainfall. And you can also see the areas that were most impacted. So the areas that received the most rain in April, May, Paarl, Franschhoek, Stellenbosch, those areas, are also some of the areas that received the least amount of rain now in the July month. So starting to compound and understand this whole effect of not everyone can be brushed with the same brush stroke. Then finally, our June-July chill units, where we at? Our chill unit accumulation in June was fairly normal. July, we had much warmer conditions and drier conditions, and that resulted in less chill accumulation. But again, if we look at that displayed, the image on the top right-hand side is what you'll see in the Climate Compass, where we've got our chill units for the month of May to July. On average, we are almost 100 units above average. But if we look at the difference map, there are areas that come out that's red here and other areas that are blue. So areas like Klein-Karoo have had a really good chill accumulation, but certain areas, Paarl, Stellenbosch, have had less than normal. And on the left-hand side, you see the local block context. Again, we've taken the Stellenbosch district and looked within the wards within that district. You can see the wards long-term mean. You're looking between 600 and 800 units. We are at almost half of that still, but August can still do something magical and we can collect the chill unit accumulation. But I think that is also sufficient chill to transition us into the season that has been collected. But what the story is saying, both statements can be true. We had only 100 units more, but in other areas, we've had a lot more units collected. And if we look at in a story like Stellenbosch district, the last 3 seasons, Stellenbosch has received almost 300 units less in its normal chill accumulation. So that is also something to watch out. What is your area's climate vulnerability in your decision making, where the chill negation is decreasing in the Stellenbosch area over the last 3 years, but it could just be a seasonal effect. So this is the compound effect that we sit with, and this is something that we're going to discuss now in the panel discussion, where April conditions, we had warmer April, May, we had a normal to slightly above normal dormancy, with a September coming in at slightly warmer temperatures, very hot November, December, transitioned us into anything that was late ripening, not with quite significant hours above 35. And then our post-harvest, where we had a lot of rainfall, also still warm conditions. So the question there is carbohydrate assimilation. Did it happen? How effectively did it happen? And then transitioning into the June, July. So the questions that we're asking is, what is bunch initiation? Did the warmer saddle of the beginning and the end of the season result in earlier, later flowering? Can we expect now? The cooler, wet post-harvest in April, May, was that enough rainfall? Did it actually render as filling the reserves for the season? And then this dry, warm winter, has it already dried out some of those reserves? So those are kind of questions we need to discuss. So where we stand now and where we're going is that we've got above normal rainfall. So we expect the soils to be wetter, but you've got to consider your soil type. We're sitting with good dam levels, 77%. Last year, we're sitting at 84%. So the question is, we should have enough water to transition us into the season. But then what are we looking into? We're looking into the El Nino. And this El Nino is described as the Godzilla of events, a super El Nino, and it's already been established as that. But we are in the Western Cape, and the South African summer rainfall regions are most impacted by the El Nino, and we've seen it year on year. But if we need to retrospectively look back as wine growers and viticulturalists and look at 2015 was an outlier year, 2023-24 was an outlier signal, and now we're going for another outlier signal, which is apparently going to shoot higher than the 2015-16. So this is where data collection becomes important, because we can now retrospectively look back and say what happened in that season. So we're expecting a warmer season, a drier season, stronger winds in the season as we transition forward. But that's no measure on what we've already faced: the extreme fires, the water scarcity, the heat waves, and the floods in one season. And now we've just got to buffer another storm that we're heading into, which I think will be okay, in that we've got good water in the dams and we've got a fairly good soil moisture index. Again, I'm caveating that depending on the soil type and the area within the Western Cape. So we need to watch our winter chill completion and our spring warming. We need to ensure that we align our rainfall, our dam levels, and our soil moisture with the spring warming, and consider the El Nino as just a planning layer. We can expect more than warmer conditions. We can expect higher evaporation. There's possible fire risks. So it's just to position ourselves in the context of that. So what changes on a Monday morning? And this is where TerraClim's trying to aggregate data so that we could provide better signals for winter chill, more data for interpretation. So actually what cultivars are suited where, site exposure, looking at spring warming, frost events, and then transitioning this decision into monitoring your phenology. So we've got a phenology app now within our web app that we really want to encourage farmers and users to start collecting actual field data, because climate leaves us at a so what scenario unless we aggregate it to what's actually happening with the plant. And we need to also remember TerraClim's role is turning data into decisions. So you have the same farm but different outcomes, and every microclimate on your farm is your operating system, and to live and work within that and use these spatial layers of climate intelligence that the South African wine industry has built through TerraClim to start looking at where are your warmer pockets on the farm, the cooler pockets on the farm, understand your climate vulnerability. And this is the block 3, the long-term game. Like, how do you start positioning your investments to be more future fit? And this is where we use climate observation data, we gap fill it, we ensure the quality of the data, we create these climate surfaces. So we essentially create a new weather station every 40 meters, virtual stations using stations in the area. And then that gets used to identify what are the best planting windows, the cultivar ripening times, the suitability, and the risk advisories that go with that. And this is where you can start decoding the integration of terroir data, which is climate, terrain, and soil, to start better understanding on farm and field level across regions, what is the data-driven cultivar suitability that can inform a more sustainable future from economic sustainability point of view. So it's really integrating and aggregating all of this data. And that is TerraClim in a nutshell, to a better climate intelligence, better questions, better decisions. And we've got the Climate Compass for that. And we are a centralized climate intelligence platform that can really inform decision-making. It's not just a web app, it's not just climate layers, but it can really inform decision-making. So now I'm excited for the conversation. Over to you, Jono.
Thank you, Tara. And to those of you who were panicking and stressing and screenshotting every 20 seconds, the presentation will be made available to you, or at least the data that Tara's been talking about will be made available to you. So I thought I wanted to kick off the conversation by directing a question to you, Isabel. I know that you and Tara chat fairly regularly, so probably none of that is news to you. But I wanted to ask you how much of what was shared there is already visible on the ground. I mean, you're dealing with loads of producers and you're having these conversations in real time. So which parts, I mean, be honest, which parts made you want to scream, amen, preach, sister, about the things that Tara was talking about?
Thanks, Jono, and morning, everybody. Well, frankly, all of it. Just if we look back, for instance, let's look at the climate signals that we saw for 2025. And something that I learned, and that was confirmed for us, is let's talk about cold units. Cold units, it's not just about how much you got, but it is very much about when you're getting it. So with it being June last year, and this kind of proves what I was taught at university 30 years ago, is it's still June is your most important month. You can have those cold units in April, but are they as effective in April as they are in June? Or are they as effective at the end of August as they would be in June? So that's the one thing around it. And then just looking at, again, 2025, the November high heat signals, for instance, seeing those signals and reading those signals and the wind and the drought conditions in that area, it already gave us the opportunity to be able to at least inform our sellers, inform our planning systems, inform our procurement systems, to say, guys, we are in for a rough ride. We are probably in for a very compressed harvest. We might have, because we saw in the previous season, we had high solar radiation, so we're seeing lots of bunches, but is the weight going to be there? So you can already start informing your systems, not years in advance, but at least you can start informing your next harvest earlier in your season. And then the current season, we are seeing definitely, and everybody on this panel will agree with me, seeing a lot of very earlier movement in our vineyards. Some Chardonnays and Chenin are already ready for a first spray. We've all heard of what's happening in Europe, in Burgundy specifically, the earliest harvest in 500 years. I'm not going to say we will be the earliest harvest in 500 years, but I think we can again look at the signals and be sure that we're going to most probably can start planning for an earlier season, again, maybe compressed harvest. So looking at what happened last season. However, coming back to that rainfall in April, we're starting out better, I think. And speaking to some of my farmers, their dams are full, or at least they have enough water for the next season. So again, doom and gloom, maybe a little bit about the Godzilla, but I think we are going into this a little bit better buffered. Yeah.
So, Heini, I mean, you have a similar scenario, but where you sit at DGB, but also, I mean, you would know then the season's kind of planning budgets are already all signed off. And so I guess the question I'd add onto the top of what Isabel said is how many of the signals that Tara mentioned are going to carry the biggest operational bill? And which one of those things that was shared changes what your teams are going to be doing in the next 6 weeks?
Jono, thanks. Yeah, maybe before my answer, the only one on the panel that can give us some feedback on the 78, 79 vintage would be Ken. I think the rest of us will remember the 15, 16. But yeah, I can't wait to Ken can give us some feedback there. And Isabel, yeah, I think the dry August that we are currently in, with only about 34, 35 millimeters in Stellenbosch, starting to generate some issues for us in the season going ahead. But yeah, let's discuss that later. Jono, back to your question. I think it's plans and budgets are the easiest part. I think the biggest question for me currently is how are we going to handle this live music playing outside? Are we going to stick to the original plans or not? And I think it's quite clear currently that the answer is no. We are not going to stick to that, and we must adapt. The one clear message from Tara is the change in extreme temperature and the possible drought that we can also maybe expect, less water. So immediately I thought, listening to your slides and presentation, Tara, is sunburn and the impact of that sunburn on quality, on yield, and profitability. So how are we going to approach this suckering that's already started in some places? And also I've got a big question mark on leaf removal. So that's maybe two practical things just coming up, and we are in that. And that will be, we must handle that in the next month to 6 weeks. And then also, that will have a big financial impact on the outcome. I mean, we've got, if there's less bunches, more sunburn, and obvious the quality aren't there, again, that will stop on the farms at the producers. So how can we use the tools, the information available to assist with decision making on farms? And then obvious that you can continue, you can add irrigation. When are you going to start with irrigation? And that all depends on things like soils, your region, what you are aiming for. Yeah, so it is if there's less water available, you must then start to think about when are we going to irrigate, and then obvious how much and the timing that will help you on the farm. But a practical example for us, to finish off this one, but practical example, things that we are starting to implement is just something simple like cover crops. I think if you've got a great stand, there's enough growth, and your cover crop is a success in some vineyards and farms, I would say just keep it for a little bit longer, trying to roll it flat a bit later, and so that can help you with soil moisture later in the season. But then again, don't stick with certain vineyards where it's not a success. Stop that the growth. It's just gonna use more water, and just don't continue with that. So that's I think some practical things that we are going to implement and thinking about over the next 6 weeks to 2 months.
Great. Well, I'm going to keep it rolling by moving it on to Marco, who, I mean, the panel so far has been measured and optimistic, but from what I know about you, Marco, you are an incurable optimist, but at the same time, you are determined to be data-driven in everything that you do. So I guess given what Tara has been talking about and using words like Godzilla, in the coming season can be pretty terrifying. So how do you hang on to everything that we've just heard, but also hang on to your optimism? What are the things that you're seeing as opportunities that everyone else just sees as challenges, perhaps?
Yeah, thanks, Jono, and morning, everyone. I must say, being labeled what did you say, incurable optimist, it's quite a heavy tag. But I kind of agree with you. I do think that's normally my approach to things, and yeah, I do maybe disagree slightly with Isabel. If I look at the data that Tara shares and what we're seeing outside, I saw some soil moisture probes from Stellenbosch this week. I do think we're up for a challenge. It doesn't look great, especially for the coastal region. And so the heat is on. You used a good analogy with the frog in the warming water. I think the water is warming, and we know what we want to do. So having a positive spin on the current situation, I've got maybe two observations. The one is purely the fact that we're having this discussion today, that we are looking at data. 2016, 2017, we didn't even look at the kind of data we're looking at today. We didn't have the discussions. And I'm telling you, if we fast forward 10 years and we look back, we're even going to sit on better data, better trends. So for me, the upside, the positive, is that the wine industry, and I really sense this urgency and this dedication amongst the industry and the producers, that there's this demand for quality data, and that in itself is a massive upside. So, and for me, Tara touched on it. It's all about the trends. Prediction models stays prediction models, but if we can capture quality trends, and it's funny, she showed there how it even varies within regions and even within small appellations. So that, and then the other thing is, if it plays out the way that I think it might be, because I think we're up for a dry vintage.
and I'm pretty sure we'll discuss it further, is that the upside for me is we're going to see our leader producers that's already actively adapted to climate change. They're going to shine in a vintage like this. So we are going to have a bigger base of producers that serves as motivation and inspiration for the rest of the industry. So yeah, looking at the Malinois and the Ebensadis, all will be affected, but they are with the dry season coming up, but they don't plan for the year end, they plan for the 20 years. The way they farm is just on a different level. So we've got a bigger base of producers and brands that really is ready for and better prepared for dry vintages. So that's the upside for me, even if the picture doesn't look great for this vintage, at least coming up.
Thanks, Marco. And maybe we're a little behind schedule, but just one quick question to Ken. I mean, so Heini talked about irrigation, and I realized that there are some folk like yourself who some of your most lauded wines are dry land farmed. So what do dry land producers do with the kind of information that Tara shared? Ken, are you there? Well, okay. If Ken is not there, can I open that question to the panel just briefly?
Sorry, there are. Can you hear me now?
Oh, there you are. Hello, Ken.
Pesky little mute button got in the way. Sorry, man. Yeah, I think that what we've had to look at over the years is almost insurance, where even in our FMC block, which was planted in 1974, Bushvine Shannon, we've brought irrigation to that vineyard just on the basis that if we need it, we can use it. Fortunately, we have water, so we have that option. And it seemed like a good idea to buy that insurance to kind of have a drip line available that if we do need to supplement, we can. As it is, that vineyard is a highly segmented little block that we end up selecting up to 20 different selections at harvest. That's how finely tuned we are in that block on its own. So there's 20 different winemaking events, 20 different harvest selections, because we already understand what the differences are, having a look at data and using the data that we've got available to us.
Okay. So perhaps one or two of the sort of counterintuitive conclusions you might draw from the data that a less experienced farmer might not have picked out?
We've got a great history of data in that vineyard where we've been looking at cameras back in the day before digital, where we were literally asking somebody to cut a 3-foot hole in the Cessna to put a camera in the Cessna to kind of take a photograph at 3,000 foot. So that's where this started 20 years ago. So we have a very good database. We almost have a matrix that we can lay over the block. And that matrix doesn't vary very much. We know which parcels, where they are, and how they perform. And, you know, the wonderful thing is understanding with an older vineyard that it's almost impossible that vineyard stays consistent. It does, but only within its very, very limited local pockets. If you've got a road around the corner of a vineyard, and that road happens to bring all of your winter rainfall, that 6 meters of dry, hard surface drains into the corner of the vineyard, into the first 10 rows of the vineyard. Those 10 rows will develop a different drainage system and different root pathways, and that corner of the vineyard will forever be different to the rest of the vineyard. And I jokingly say to people, imagine you plant a vineyard, it's all exactly the same material from the same mother block. They're all identical. You have twin boys. They're identical. They grow up. One becomes a concert violinist, and the other one is Bakkies Botha. They're going to walk differently. They're going to talk differently. They're going to look different. They're going to, you know, everything changes at 50 years old. And that's where we're getting with this vineyard, understanding those changes in the vineyard.
Amazing. Thank you, Ken.
Jono,
So, yes.
Just a quick one. I just want to add something to what Marco said. I think the industry is using technology to position ourselves in regions and areas that can handle these extremes better. We can just see that where we are driving around, and Ken, I think, will agree on this. If you've got a dryland situation, it's sad that some of the vineyards aren't there anymore, but it's not going to get easier. So positioning yourself, using technology, using models that's available is going to get even more crucial. And we must use that. So I think, yes, Marco is 100% correct. There's bigger brands, and there's no difference between a guy developing a lot of vectors and only one. It's expensive. So you've got one chance, and you must make sure. So plant vineyards where it's better suitable for these extreme temperatures, heat, wind, etc., to get to the quality that you are aiming for.
Yeah, great. Thanks, Hani. And we're definitely going to talk about the long term in block 3. We've got about 8 minutes to talk about the next 18 months to 3 years. So obviously, Tara, you mentioned earlier that, you know, we had 70, 78, we had 88, 15, 16, 23, 24. I mean, we've had seasons that have looked like this one before. So if a producer left this webinar and built one dashboard for their farm for the next 3 seasons, what metrics belong on that dashboard? Tara?
Thanks, Jono. Yeah, thank you. That's a really hard question, because I think we always want to inundate ourselves as scientists to measure a lot. But I think hindsight is your best foresight, honestly and truly. And I think understanding what your climate vulnerability is, where things are changing. So for me, it would be find the nearest weather station in your area and start locking into that and help service that station. Sometimes it just takes a farmer to walk past and just, you know, clean the rain gauge a bit or do something to it, just to ensure we get consistent rainfall. And just consistent data, because that data is what's going to start giving you the right picture in the next 3 years as to what's actually happening in your environment. How many hours are you getting above 35? What do your winters look like? Is your chill notion changing into potential frost pockets, which we've seen in some areas? So for me, it's really important. And then I think, like, measure. And it's terrible saying that as a scientist, but measuring your phenological stages, measuring your water applications. And a lot of the industry are good at some of that, but very few people are measuring phenology stages, and the phenology stages changes the way that you interpret your climate data. So I really want to encourage that, even if it's just flowering and harvest, let's just collect more data. And I think that would be the most important thing on a dashboard. Just get more access to climate data and start collecting your critical measurement points that you as a viticulturalist deem important, and a winemaker, because you want to tell a story too when it gets to marketing. What story are you telling that makes you different to sell your wine at a better price point potentially?
Sure.
Yeah. And then soil is really important. Soil is the only buffer we have.
For those of you who perhaps can't see it, Isabel is nodding furiously along. She's saying, preach, amen. So then, okay, so you mentioned hindsight, Tara. So Marco, can I ask you, you watched the 2016-17 vintage up close. What lessons from that particularly difficult time stuck? What were the ones where you're like, I can never afford to forget that one?
Yeah, for me, Jono, there's without a doubt the 2016-17 drought. And drought's a funny thing; it creeps up on you. There's one key message that I got from there, and that is that long-term decision making, long-term vineyard practices is your first and best line of defense. That sets the foundation. So what you do in season obviously helps, but that sets the foundation. And we saw it back then, and those vineyards just survive dry seasons much better. Funny enough, we mentioned dam levels looking good. It's I know Roberts or the Breda River looks fairly well. There's I think they'll get at least 80% of the water. There's water running away in the Klein Karoo. That looks good. Olifants River is looking positive. I am worried for obviously the coastal region, as I said. Without a doubt, we need to activate dry vintage mode. Let's call it dry vintage mode for the coastal region. But I do feel for the inland regions as well. I think they're going to be silly to think we're safe. So to manage the season ahead, we've got a vast toolkit of what to do. You see in the achterparel, the guys are already terminating cover crops. So you can even do AI search on how to manage vineyards in dry seasons. I think the season ahead, we're going to heavily rely on proper irrigation scheduling. That's going to be the key thing above all the other stuff, like don't over fertilize, cover crop terminations, don't overexpose. Heine said that. Be careful of overexposing your fruit. For this year, we do expect less vigor. So, but conscious irrigation scheduling will be key. So that's my message to my clients in the different regions. It's absolutely, I think it's a dry vintage mentality that we need to go in. And also, you can always back off later on should the situation improve. But yeah, that's my view.
Thank you, Marco. So taking that saying long-term planning is key, and that's your first line of defense. But some things change very quickly. And Isabel, I mean, we were mentioning the other day that their Chardonnay blocks getting their first sprays a month earlier this year than other years. So when a vine's clock shifts like that, what are the first signs of chaos? So what breaks first in your planning when you're working at the scale that you work at?
Okay, I don't want to say that. Okay, my first thought is not what breaks, but it is what shifts.
Okay.
And here we know, I mean, we see that the vine's clock has shifted. It's not for everything, but specifically the young vines, we're seeing, I mean, goodness, like I mentioned earlier, it's crazy actually what's going on there. And then if the vine's clock shifts, the whole chain shifts. And it starts moving. So flowering, ripening, and then potential harvest timing, and then that starts affecting our planning. It starts affecting on where we contract what, for instance. And then, of course, also you can foresee that, again, like previous season, grape harvest planning could become an issue, again, a potential compressed harvest. But I just want to quickly come back to what Marco said now earlier around the coastal season, the coastal area. There's already talk of that there might be water restrictions, even with full dams. City of Cape Town has already sent out their little notices that we don't want to end up in the same trouble that we ended up previously. So they might start earlier with water restrictions. And where will they start? With the guys that get their water from Theewater, etc. So that's also something that you need to keep on the back of your mind when you as a farmer start planning for your irrigation. If you are solely dependent on water that comes from Theewater and you don't have a dam on your farm, it needs to come from the pipe. Then you need to start thinking of, maybe I need to just fill up my soils a little bit earlier. You need to think around irrigation scheduling and when you're going to start. And especially for the coming season, really we need to think of looking at earlier irrigation. But now added to that, if we have, like we are seeing these extremes in the shoulder seasons, like we saw in April. And I mean, this is maybe just wishful thinking. I do hope it's not. Maybe we see the same thing in September, like we've seen in previous years. So while it was a massive storm, we might be filling up soils again in September. So that's where I know Marco is Mr. Positivity. That's where I hope to be, not Mrs. Delusional, but also Mrs. Positivity when it comes to that. I just also want to talk to what Tara said earlier. I call it citizen scientists, and we all need everybody to start collecting data, specifically phenology data and soil data. We all have the information on our soils, but we need to get it on one platform, because a climate intelligence tool is only as intelligent as the information that we put in there. And we all know our soil intelligence is absolutely one of the most important things, along with phenology. So if we can capture those observations consistently from all areas, then we can start ground truthing what the models and the algorithms and the mathematics are saying. And I think that is something very important that we need to land here. So yeah, that's my story.
Well, I do like the idea of a grand battle between Captain Optimo and Madame Delusional. I think that could make a great episode. But I do love what you were talking about. I think that citizen scientist, which I've heard both you and Tara talk about, is important, not in just that it's obvious, because the more people submitting good data, the more powerful the conclusions, or at least the more far-reaching the conclusions. But the other thing that it does is shift the mentality from data being something that I hope someone will send me to something that I can help build. And there's something that I think is like sewn and woven into the farmer ethos about, a boer maak 'n plan. And so in many senses, it seems odd that it isn't already happening more, that farmers wouldn't want to be immediately submitting this sort of data. And look, we are going to move on to block 3 now, but I think that's a really good segue, because I mean, like I've spent time in France talking to the president of change management at Mouton Chandon, and working with thousands and thousands and thousands of producers. And he says that the number one thing that gets in the way of data, that's what he was saying, is intuition, ironically. And so you've got these two systems working against each other, which sometimes they are in unison and sometimes not. But a farmer who's worked a patch of land for 30 years has internalized and just developed such a powerful intuition for that land. And farmers often talk about being married to the land. And I guess that's only a problem when you have data saying one thing and intuition saying another thing. And it's very important that we acknowledge how powerful that can be, and perhaps just touch on that a little bit going into this final section, where we talk about how to plan not for the next 3 years, but for the next 30 years. So maybe we can start the section directing a question at you, Heini. DGB has made some serious long-term commitments to land, to vineyards in certain areas. You don't need to give us a farm tour. I'd rather hear the method behind how you've made those calls.
Yeah, quick one on your intuition / gut feel. I think use the tool as a guideline. It's still important to combine that with your gut. And most of these farmers has got years of experience on the farm. So combine that. Don't just trust your gut, and also don't just trust the science. That combination is important, and I think your gut will understand that as well. But yeah, back to your question. I think in planning and especially planning a project like the one that DGB has recently done, there's no difference between planning for 50, 100 hectares and planning for 1 hectare. We know that the amount of detail that's supposed to go into that is exactly the same. So everyone that is part of this conversation are planning not just for now, they are planning for planting vineyards for the next generation. So it's so expensive that you can't just plant and plan what you are feeling to do. You can't just, only like I just said, my gut feels that I must plant a certain variety on a certain region or terroir or spot or site. Use the data and the models that's available to help with that decisions. And I think that is crucial. Plant varieties that belongs in the correct region and specific sites. And like I said, use the technology. Decide on your quality, your style of wine, and that's what it's about. I mean, we've done quite a few developments over the last few years, and it all started with what is your aim at the end of the day? You are planting and farming vineyards and grapes, producing grapes for a wine style. So I think that's the most important point for me. But again, bringing it back to a practical example was just using a model to decide on, and you can look at aspects and slopes and radiation and etc. But a important one for me was a simple thing like a row direction. If you just look at how many grapes you are actually losing in either quantity and quality if you are planting the wrong row direction. And I've got a trial over the last 2 years. We've got on the same farm 2 different blocks, 2 different row directions, but it's the same plant date, same cultivar, soils, let's call it the same for this. And we're tasting the wines, and the one is good enough for 120 Rand bottle, and the other one for 220. And that was the same for this now over the last 2 years. So it's so simple. Using the technology, the models that's available to decide on small things that can make a huge difference on your side, and especially on profitability, which is very tight. I think we are unfortunately getting used to using the words like, gee, let's try to break even, which is wrong. We can't, it's not sustainable. It's not sustainable to continue just with a mindset of breaking even is good enough these days. Use the technology, make the right decisions, and yeah, I think that's the most important thing from my side.
Thank you. Well, so maybe we can move on, Ken, to say, and I know you've got some strong feelings on this. We're talking about planning for the long term, and Heini was talking about how to pick sites and you know, when you're going to be planting new vineyards. But why don't you tell us perhaps your gut feel of, you know, of today's big 5 varieties in South Africa, how many do you think still deserve their spot in the ground in 30 years' time? And what should nobody be planting in South Africa at all ever again?
I have a strong feeling, Jono, that you're leading me astray here. But let's have a go at it. Lead me not into temptation. Yeah, I know. As you were saying, look, I think that just to go back one step, talking about your citizen scientist, we all have, I'm sure, the most fond memories of speaking to Jan Boelan-Coetzee. And there was, I think, the primary example of a citizen scientist. You could sit and talk to Jan about a vintage that was happening, and he'd sit and tell you, yeah, but in 2012 was it ook net so. And he would almost know, down to the rainfall, down to the sunshine hours. He had that data before Tara came along. I think Jan was our best source of data, if you had time to sit and listen to him. And he really had, you talk about nurture, you talk about that instinct. He was instinctive, but at the same time, it was all based on fact. He had very, very good feelings for the soil and how that worked. And I think that Citizen Scientist Project is a great win. Looking at our vineyards and looking, you know, talking about planting now, anyway, you're looking at a future. You probably, I think, are talking about a 35-year horizon. You're saying, what's this gonna look like in 35 years' time? And just to kind of put that in perspective, what happened 35 years ago? Raise your hand if you had a cell phone. I'm telling you, not a single person on planet Earth had a cell phone. Now, that's a bit of a shock. Now, that's how much the world changes in 35 years. Bush hadn't yet taken America to war in Iraq 35 years ago. The ANC hadn't yet come to power 35 years ago. A lot changes in 35 years. And if we're not ready to accept a quantum shift, we cannot continue doing the same stuff, expecting a different outcome. And if I can only give you from my own experience on our property, Skolzenhof, right, which is about 6 kilometers from Colts Bay, we're underneath the Helderberg. That was planted extensively to Chenin Blanc, Syrah, some Sauvignon Blanc, a little bit of Sanso. When we bought the property, we looked at that Sauvignon Blanc, and I took our very first grapes, our very first vintage. I took a small batch of 2.7 tons to Mike Dobrovich to make Sauvignon Blanc in 1994. And we made Sauvignon Blanc, was our very first vintage, not Chenin Blanc, by the way. We made Sauvignon Blanc in our very first vintage. I made it with Mike. And Mike, we'd been through the vineyards. There were 3 vineyards on the property, and we decided that was the very best vineyard. And he was quite happy with it and whatever. We put the wine together. I fermented it in barrels. We didn't have any fermentation tank space. It was too small a batch. It was just 6 barrels. We got the barrels from Hempy's and Kevin Arnold. And we came with a Blanc Fumé to the market. We started making Sauvignon Blanc after that on a more commercial level, on a more commercial basis. And I was always aware that our Sauvignon never really got the brightness, never got the intensity, never had that natural acidity. And we started looking at the clones, and was it the clones, was it the plantings, was it the row direction, et cetera, et cetera. But long story short, over a period of time, we have removed all the Sauvignon Blanc on our property. It occurred to me that you could have a cool walk like you were born in the Swartland, but you didn't, that wasn't enough to make Sauvignon Blanc cool. You needed a proper cool site for Sauvignon Blanc. I would go so far as to say, and probably get shut down, that there might be a dozen absolutely perfect Sauvignon Blanc sites in South Africa. And those sites are all because they're cool, because they're at altitude, or they have an ocean proximity. And I think that those 2 factors for Sauvignon Blanc are absolutely critical. I remember looking at a neighbor that had come down or bought a property near us, and he had the extension officers come and have a look at his land and recommend what he should plant. And they recommended he should plant Sauvignon Blanc because he'd get a good average crop. I ask you with tears in my eyes, who the hell gets out of bed to be average? How on earth do you plant a long-term 35-year crop because it's going to be average? What drives you to do something so limiting? You know, you've got to be better than average. Please, we've got to look beyond the average. And to my mind, I think that in terms of Jono's question, if Sauvignon's the big 5, one of the big 5, there's a real question in my mind. In 35 years' time, do we need or will we be able to plant Sauvignon Blanc? It has wonderful commercial viability. I know people are already looking for the 2027 Sauvignon Blancs. I mean, it's that kind of great wine that people are hunting for all the time. But it has, I mean, I'm not sure if it's because if people say Sauvignon Blanc, they think they've mastered a foreign language. But I mean, Sauvignon Blanc, I'm not sure it's going to remain one of our big 5. If you have a look at Jordan, they're planting the Zertico. And I think that's a really good bet. I would put money on a Zertico before I put it on Sauvignon Blanc. If you're looking at the next 35 years, and you're looking at what will change in 35 years, I think a Zertico is a good bet. That's where my money's going.
So, I mean, that's fantastic, because it's also one of the questions I wanted to ask Marco next. I mean, Marco spends a lot of his time working with nurseries themselves, and there's something we haven't touched on at all, which is the development of new root stocks. But I actually want to just spread the question a little bit wider, Marco. First of all, you know, what is the development in rootstock life like? What are there things that most farmers actually don't know are available to them, the rootstocks that actually are going to be a massive game changer over the next 30 years that they should know about now? And the other thing is, aside from a Certico, what are the cultivars that nurseries are getting excited about when they plan long term?
Yeah, it's for me, it's always intriguing to see the intent behind a client's order and what they want to achieve with that. I'm glad I don't have to cast my opinion on the future of Sauvignon Blanc, but South Africa, we in a good position that we've done good research on rootstocks for drought tolerance, and we've got them available, and I can the likes of Richter under 10 stays put, the guy still relies heavily on that. I see an upswing in Richter 99, which is, according to me, the absolute king of drought tolerance. We saw that in 16, 17. And I see a lot of clients, especially on the premium side, they know exactly what they want to order. They've got a soil scientist on board. They know exactly what they want to order, and they stick to that. If they can't get the plant material, they rather skip the year. In terms of varietals, it's both on the one hand, the commercial side, if Sovereign sells at 120 Rand a bottle, the guys will still keep planting it, unfortunately. We've done good work in the industry on the alternative varietals, and we've got progressive winemakers working with those varietals, with the likes we just mentioned, Acertico, Macabeo, Picpool. There's definitely some varietals that's putting up its hands, and you see them getting ordered every year at small quantities though. How are we going to phase that in to the market and get the market to understand those varietals and really know that those varietals can actually provide something better to them? That's going to be the challenge. But we are a progressive industry and we're very innovative, and I see that with the way we already looking at those varietals. So yeah, but it's still I'd say to a big extent still commercially driven in terms of the orders coming through.
Yeah, so and that is because you know those three little words, if it sells. You know, and I mean, look, we were going to spend time talking about things going on in Europe, and we can maybe come back to that if we need to. But we are into question and answer time, and there've been a couple of questions which actually kind of all roll into one. Or one question was about, you know, if a new cultivar has been identified that has a similar style, how long will the industry take to you know, assimilate it? And then another question, well, you just mentioned how, sorry, Heine, you mentioned how a farmer, you know, might have produced some grapes and one little patch of vineyard could produce grapes at 220, whereas the other produced grapes at a quality that could sell for a 100. So what you're touching on there is premiumization. And I think for some farmers who perhaps have only ever sold grapes at a certain level, the thought of producing grapes that now need to sell for double is quite a scary thing to do. So, you know, yes, the numbers make sense, but he's still got to figure out how and who to sell that to. So I think to sum it up in a question to the panel is, if it sells is crucial. And how does that affect what a farmer does? I don't know if anyone wants to take a stab at that.
John, I think it's important to understand, again, we're getting back to understanding your farm, understanding your region, and working with the seller, the brand that's going to buy your grapes. That is crucial. The days of just thumbs up, planting vineyards and hope for the best afterwards, I think that is gone. So understand your region, understand what you are farming for, and also your challenges lying ahead. We spoke about it this morning a lot, weather changing and conditions and climates and etc. So keep that in mind when you are planning for certain varieties. But I am, and I think you are spot on rather for the long term, stick to varieties that you know is suitable for that specific site than planting something that is popular. I think we've all seen this Vineyard movie a few years ago. So yeah, so that's my mind. Stick to your region, know what you are farming for, working with the buyer or seller. And if it's at 30, 40 tons hectare or at 8 tons hectare, you know what's your game plan and stick to that.
So I think if I can flip the question on its head a little bit, I mean, everyone loves a good Russian dashboard cam crash video, right? Those things always go viral. So I want to ask you guys to cast your minds back over the last 30 years. And if you have to just do it because you heard someone old and grey tell you, then do that. But can you think of examples of long-term investment or bets, long-term bets on the South African wine industry that went horribly wrong? And what were the lessons that perhaps we could draw from that? So you talked about Viognier, which was perhaps, you know, just some, you know, a whole lot of people hopping on a trend that collapsed a little. But I know there've been other instances of people thinking they were planning long-term and things did not pan out like that. What can we learn from anecdotes? Does anyone have a story they can share?
You know, John, if I could weigh in here, I have to say it's very, very difficult to ever use the Australians as a good example. You know how we feel about that. But on a trip to Australia, one of the growers there, working with Peter Barry at the Jim Barry estate in Clare Valley, said to me in his very best Australian, mate, you don't plant anything until you know what the price is on the shelf. Now, that I think is key. You have to already identify the commercial viability of what you're planting before you plant it. If you're planting something with the hope that it's going to do well, that's not sufficient. You have to plant something, and very much as Heini was saying, it's got to be the right cultivar in the right place, because it won't do well anywhere else. You really have to drill down to the right vine in the right place. It's got to be a suitable, comfortable environment for the future, and you're looking long term, you're looking ahead. And so, once again, it's just that concept of what are we going to look like in 35 years' time? What's the market going to look like? Can we afford to plant? The variation, and I think to Marco's point, to Heine's point, the variation, I can buy a Chenin Blanc grape at 3,500 Rand a ton or at 26,000 Rand a ton. That's Chenin Blanc. What's the variation? Now, that 26,000 Rand a ton is probably not 1% of the vineyard. So it's a very, very small fraction of what's available. But that's the range because it's planted in the right place, because it behaves differently, because it's not average. So if you could take average at 6,000 a ton and achieve 26,000 a ton, you've done extremely well for yourself. And I think that's what we're looking for is to find the best sites. That's the critical aspect. And by best site, I mean the site that is best matched to the cultivar. And then we're looking at rootstocks. And then you're looking at clones. The clone is typically the racing chip that you add to your engine if you want some better performance. The clone is just a different chip. It just gives you a different take on the same cultivar. But those clones are so critically important. Those clones, back in the day when Chenin Blanc, the KWV would tell you, we've got this clone because it produces a massive production, a very high volume. We've got this clone, and it doesn't produce very good volume, but we like it because it doesn't rot. So you had different clones and you had different attributes for different clones. Add to that the complexity of rootstocks. Add to that the ideal site, and then you start talking about commercial viability.
But I suppose there is the obvious chicken egg thing of having to explore with clones with cultivars that like Assertico, but the Jordans didn't plant the Assertico because they knew what it would sell for on the shelf. So there's that kind of thing going on. And in the reverse, Malbec has been here for decades, but currently in South Africa, and I'm not going to mention the brand, but the fastest growing SKU, red wine SKU in South Africa at the moment is a Malbec, of all things. So there's two messages. One is, if you plant obscure grapes, no one's going to buy it ever. And then there's the other message that, well, any cultivar, if marketed well, can be a success if the product is at the right price and the distribution is good. So this is open to the panel because I think it ties in with the question earlier, how long would an industry take to adopt a new cultivar? Surely that question has to be connected to the market. Does anyone have any pearls of wisdom in that sphere?
I just want to add to that, and this comes back to the whole idea of industry collaboration, because the industry only wins if the storytellers tell the story for the whole industry. So the question being, how long does it take for a new cultivar to be adopted into the industry? Is how do the storytellers, because I know we are here now to talk about climate, but I mean, that's climate and climate intelligence, but that's just one of the puzzle pieces of this whole industry. Yeah. And that's climate. Another part of the puzzle piece or of the puzzle is definitely having the storytellers tell the story for the whole industry. Yes, we are all in this to make money and blah, blah, blah. But in the end, as an industry, we want to survive. And as an industry, we then need to have that voice of saying, Azertico, that's the way we go, or Malbec, that's the way we go, or Alvarinho, that's the way we go. And telling the story, but also not telling the same old story. What's that thing? Madness is doing the same thing the same way and expecting different results. Let's tell a different story, and let's use our climate intelligence to be part of that story. My 2 cents worth.
Do you think that the responsibility is weighted towards the bigger producers to be telling those stories?
It's everybody's coming back to I don't want to say then citizen scientists. Now we're saying citizen marketers, citizen storytellers. Yes, we're all in this together.
Yeah. Well, we do have 5 minutes left, and I actually really wanted to hear about what's going on in Europe, simply because I think that's relevant, even though it feels so far away. So Ken, you've actually been traveling abroad there, and you've seen some pretty crazy things. Can you just share a little bit of what you witnessed in your weeks driving through Europe?
Jono, I would happily, and I've got to say that Schadenfreude is never a happy thought, but you have a feeling that, and we spoke about earlier, South Africans and our particular resistance and the way that we just always seem to manage a problem. And Europe is seeing dry conditions that they are completely unaware of. They don't know that this is a possibility. They're seeing stuff happen that they just can't make sense of. And we're talking about Burgundy have its earliest harvest in 500 years. We're talking about the Danube that is now split into 2 streams. We're talking about an attempt to actually go and blast the riverbed of the Danube to try and create one solid stream again. Imagine after 3 months of blasting, no, they couldn't even get that to work. So there's a major, there are warships lying on the riverbed of the Danube that are now fully visible because there's no river anymore. And you've got things going on. The climate in Europe, the climate change here is extreme. If you go back 30 years to Michael Troll, who was in Franschhoek for a while, and also in Denbies, I think, in England, like one of the early vineyards in England. Do you know that there are currently more than 1,000 vineyards registered in England? Now, 30 years ago, there were 7. It's gone from 7 to 1,000 vineyards. And that's a fairly strong indicator that something's changed. And everybody's looking at the upside and saying, well, we can now plant grapes. And there are now vineyards as far north as Scotland. Yes, believe it or not, we're going to have Scottish wine, and it doesn't come in a whiskey bottle. I've always loved Scottish wine, but this is different. This is really different. And we're seeing a thing moving. And, one of the big things is all of us are cut to a shape that we're comfortable in. Nobody wants to change. Change is a difficult matter for everybody. And when you look at Europe specifically, their traditions are so rock steady. Their traditions, their vineyard traditions are so established. There's a vineyard in the Loire Valley that Joan of Arc is said to have walked across. That's a special vineyard now because she walked across it 400 years ago. So this is how rock solid they are on tradition. Now you're asking them to change a cultivar, asking them to make a cultivar decision, asking them to change what they're planting, asking them to rethink the way they prune, asking them to change their yields, asking them to look at irrigation. This is going to be a hard change. It's going to be a hard change. And apart from just the comfort level, there are a number of rules and laws within their appellation contrôlée, within their wine of origin system that don't allow changes. There are a lot of things they are not allowed to do. It's locked in by law. So, I think Europe really has to look at, there's a knock on the door, and they better open that door and find out before it gets broken down. There's a lot of stuff going on.
Thanks, Ken. Well, we do have just got a few minutes left before we have to wrap up. But Tara, perhaps I just wanted to come back to you and close with a question to you. Obviously, in the work that you've done with TerraClim, you have people, handing you their patches of land and saying, look into the crystal ball and tell us what we have to do. I just wondered what was perhaps or what has been one of the answers that has surprised producers the most when you look at South Africa over the next 30 years, based on the data that you guys are processing on a daily basis? What is perhaps the one thing that is counterintuitive or surprising that would be useful for farmers to know today?
I don't feel very prepared to answer that. I feel like it could also be a slight trap. I think for me, I think it's again going back down to the data-driven approach, even from what cultivars, clones, rootstocks are working and not working in certain areas. And I think as an industry, we need to start being a little bit less tight-fisted with data sharing and be more open with sharing data, because in the larger pool, you are always anonymized, but there's so much value that you render from being part of a bigger picture, benchmarking, and actually starting to be honest about what cultivars are working where, and driving the industry into a position in 35 years that we can actually look at premiumization. And as Ken is saying, like 35 years from now is so far removed, what would it look like? But if we don't start collecting data, so when we've got a suitability tool that we collected data with the South African wine industry. It was a kind of a research project. And I am blown away at the value of that suitability tool. So it aggregates 44 environmental parameters: terrain, climate, soil. And it's just looking broad brushstrokes as to what cultivar works where. And when we do the environmental extraction of that specific point, it's amazing that on farm and field level, you can see differences in fields, and you can see the difference in the expression of the actual typicity and style that comes through in the wines. But we need to, as an industry, start using solutions like the web app, which was created for the South African wine industry, to digitize your fields. And if you have a multiple of cluster farms, that clusters up, and you can start playing and wrangling data. And I think we also in the AI space, AI is of very little use to many if it's not trained correctly and the data is not stored correctly. And I think we are trying to create a platform, a data intelligence platform that can inform better decision making for the future. And again, caveat all of this with never do it without the gut feel, like Hani was saying. It's about the intelligence and the science, but taking that gut feel and bringing that together. And I think the more data we collect, the more data we can navigate scientifically and data intelligence wise, and then narrate it with a gut feel, to sit with the consultants and the viticulturalists and stew over the data does the talking. And that's something that Albert and Steph and I identified in my PhD. It's phenomenal that data does do the talking, and that's why I love climate science so much. So I think we just need to collect more data as an industry and start building that narrative of what stories are we going to tell on the international platforms to sell our wine at a better price in a better market, and take the markets because they belong to us, because you make amazing wine from an amazing climate.
You dodged that imaginary trap beautifully, so thank you. Thank you for that. So I think the best way to wrap this up perhaps is just to, I'm not going to be able to summarize it in 2.5 minutes, and Gerard still needs one at least, but perhaps to just say there were 3 sections today. There was clear and present danger, there was short-term planning, and there was long-term planning. And I feel like for those of you who've been listening in here, I hope you have notes in all 3 of those positions. And one of those positions, the long-term planning, will involve you starting to record data now. And I think that's the thing. We are so busy putting out fires or focusing on the immediate future that we forget that the little bits that we record now will help us in 3 years, and then will help us in 30 years' time. So try and remember those 3 layers that we discussed on today: immediate, short-term, and long-term, and know that what we do in the short term is going to affect the long term. So that's, I think, a decent summary of what we've touched on today. And of course, the presentation or the data from it will be made available to delegates. And with that, I want to thank the panel and to hand back over to Gerard to close out for us.
Wow, thanks, Jono. Thanks, panelists. I think it was such a fascinating conversation. I think we can go on with this for another hour at least. But thanks, Jono, for leading the discussion, for the panelists, for your wisdom, for your knowledge. Thanks for sharing your experience with us. I think I've dotted down so many things here that I think I would need another half an hour just to go through and gather my thoughts about what was said here. But I think if I listen to everybody, the call to action was actually, let's all start collecting data. Let's all become part of the solution. I think the call to citizen scientists, citizen marketers, storytellers, that was actually the thing that excited me the most. We all have something to share, and we can build on this. And with better information, we can get and make better decisions. So I want to invite you to keep on with this discussion offline, contact us, be part of the solution, bring your data, and we can together make a difference in this industry to make it more sustainable and more profitable. Thanks to everybody being part of here, the panelists again, to Jono, and also to you and the audience. We definitely gonna continue the discussion, and I want to wish you a good day. Keep well, everybody. With that, bye bye.